Assalamualaikum, Aatir. How are you?
Walaikum assalam, Abdul. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good too. Our very first episode. We've finally done it.
Finally, man. I'm so looking forward to this now.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons why Aatir is laughing is because we've had quite a few takes that we thought were not good enough for episode 1. Even though हमने जब podcast start किया था तो हमने सोचा था हम बिल्कुल आराम से अच्छा अगर बुरा भी जाते तो कोई बात नहीं कौन से हम कोई professional podcasters हैं कि we have to hit the nail on the head the first time around.
True.
But as it seems, we're struggling to get the first episode out. So there's
एक
some
recording भी ज़ाया हुई है हमारी.
Yeah.
That's another frustration. But yeah, it happens, I guess. This is how we learn.
Yeah. So for some context, what is this podcast? What is the format? So this podcast is basically the idea behind this podcast is that Aatir and I usually have these conversations where I'm eating Aatir's brain, and Aatir being ever so magnanimous, gives me this super comprehensive and is very patient with me in providing these incredible answers. And one of these days, I thought, it'll be a great idea if there is a way for us to be able to distribute this content. And since audio format is so much easier, or so we think, and also preserves that natural form of conversation between two people, I thought कि हम podcast से शुरू करते हैं. The format is something like this. It's going to be a 20-minute podcast. बहुत unstructured सा होगा, जैसे हमने बताया कि we're trying to preserve that normal, that conversational element to it. We might struggle at the start, but hopefully, once you get familiar to our voices and to our faces, it's going to be much smoother. And at this stage, we're going to focus on product management and the tech ecosystem. Over majority, हम ज़्यादा Pakistani tech ecosystem पे बात करेंगे, but obviously, we don't want to limit ourselves to only that. We're going to talk about some of the more interesting news and some of the more happening news within the tech ecosystem, within the startup ecosystem. But हमारा primary goal ये है कि हम product management की बातें करें. Product management में खाली product manager नहीं होता. Product management is just one of those functional areas which involves which involves a lot more. And before I start on a monologue on what it is, I'll let the expert here talk about it. And today's episode is basically going to focus around SaaS businesses, and within SaaS, we're going to talk about Figma. And Figma recently made news. It got acquired by Adobe for $20 billion. And continuing on that theme, we'll also talk about a more local acquisition, Cloudways, which got acquired for $350 million. So अभी million और billion का फर्क है थोड़ा हमारी और उनकी industry में, but hopefully soon enough. So the goal is that in both these startups that got acquired, one is local, one is international, one is obviously magnitudes bigger than the other one. But they're both SaaS business models, and I think that's the person that we're speaking with, Aatir, as I've already spoken about this in my intro, is a guru when it comes to software as a service. So hopefully we can extract some of the insight from that. थोड़ा सा लंबा intro हो गया, but hopefully आप आगे I'm going to
बहुत ज्यादा मक्खन लगा दिया यार अब्दुल, बस थोड़ा कम कर दो यार, मैं कोलेस्ट्रॉल नहीं इतना ज्यादा मेरे लिए ठीक.
Alright. By the way, what's that background noise? I think I don't know whether the audience can hear it or not, but I think there's basically two different kinds of noises that I'm hearing. Someone is like crying or screaming, or maybe and then there's some music also playing. But I know that
sorry about that. या बेसिकली मैं ना सो कनाडा के अंदर प्रॉब्लम एक ये है कि यहाँ की जो वॉल्स है ना बहुत थिन है, क्योंकि इट्स बेसिकली मेड ऑफ वुड, नॉट कंक्रीट और ब्रिक और एनीथिंग लाइक दैट. तो अभी दोपहर का टाइम है, बाहर बच्चे खेल रहे हैं प्लेग्राउंड के अंदर, और मेरे बच्चे नहीं है, दिस जस्ट लाइक रैंडम किड्स प्लेइंग. एंड जो मेरा ऊपर नेबर है, ही इज सो let's just say कि वो बड़ा शौकीन मिजाज है, so he's currently drumming and I think he's like on his like वो हर सैटरडे एक कॉन्सर्ट करता है, जो कि मैं भी एक sort of उसका inadvertently listener और ऑडियंस बन जाता हूँ. एंड उसकी बीवी भी मतलब कि गाती है, कैरियोकी करती है, which is not the most pleasant voice at all.
Oh, wow.
So sorry for that. Apologies in advance. Like if you hear a few of these riffs coming in through the microphone.
No, that's completely okay. I was just about to say that you probably end up getting a free concert, but you said that.
Yeah, it's
I'm,
not that
assu-
enjoyable.
I'm assuming you're not a fan of the music. All right. Without further ado, Arthur, so let's dive into it. Before I talk about Figma or Cloudways specifically, I would like to understand ke actually SaaS hota kya hai? And you know, A, SaaS होता क्या है और B, what actually makes it so interesting in terms of a business model? Why, we've
Yeah.
if anyone's read this interesting article by Anderson, very matlab, not just interesting but an incredibly popular article which is called Why Software is Going to Eat the World. And I'll link it to the podcast notes here. But on to you, Arthur. What's so interesting about this business model, and what is SaaS?
Yeah, so SaaS की जहाँ तक बात आती है, when you look at what it means as software as a service, and ultimately what you're trying to do is provide a software on the cloud, which is accessible from anywhere and over the internet, and you're providing value to the user that way. And essentially, any internet business in modern era is of a SaaS nature. Obviously, मतलब उसके different flavors होते हैं, which we can get into later on. But some examples are your Mailchimps and your Intercoms, Miro, Canva, Notion. All of these are examples of SaaS businesses. Now, then you've got B2B and B2C, or वो bifurcation भी है, which increasingly is creating a gray area now. तकरीबन दोनों के लिए ये इस्तेमाल किया जाता है. But yeah, so any cloud-based service, internet-based service, which is available in a subscription model, where you can just go and either through a salesperson or either through like product-led growth, a PLG model, you can get access to that without having to deploy it on a physical system yourself, or जो पुराने ज़माने में होता था कि server deployment or on-premise deployment. So that's your SaaS. And I think the initial players in this business was Intuit and Salesforce. They sort of like started this trend back in the early 2000s, and now it's blown up to this multi-billion-dollar industry where we have so many players working alongside it, and now we've as we can see, we're seeing massive exits as well. But yeah, I think what it does is ultimately democratizes software. It gives access to people. Remote teams can work on it now because everything's on the internet, and you get access to your data across devices and as well. So SaaS is sort of that generic umbrella term for all those softwares, and why it's such an interesting business model and why it's close to my heart. I think with SaaS, I think it's very, even as a product manager, it's very iteratable. So you can innovate and do a lot of updates and enhancements on the fly. So as opposed to an on-premise environment or a desktop application, which forces someone to update. And then there's a lot of interesting data and experimentation that you can do with the SaaS business. But that's from a product's perspective. And obviously we may expand into PLG later on. लेकिन from a business perspective, अगर आप देखा जाए तो to start a SaaS business, especially अब तो खैर crowded market हो गया, there's a very red ocean market. But if you do find a niche where you can deploy a solution to a user problem through software as a service, then उसमें फिर ये है कि you have great gross margins, तकरीबन 30 to 50% आपके gross margins हो जाते हैं. And why that happens is क्योंकि आपने software एक दफा बना लिया. Now that's there. To acquire a user, of course, आपको marketing budget चाहिए, but to serve them, serve the first user and the second user and then the 1,000th user, आपकी कोई incremental cost इतनी ज़्यादा बढ़ती नहीं है. You can ultimately use that same software to serve them equally well. And that's why it becomes very interesting, because आपकी growth scale जो है वो exponential हो सकती है. Profitability, if done well, obviously there are bad SaaS applications with poor unit economics as well, but profitability is something that you can also ensure. In my experience, मैंने एक दो products किए. Recruitment product का नाम था Talentera. That was also a profitable product. 20% profits थे हमारे. अभी VFairs का भी हमारा चल रहा है. And even with pricing being updated every now and then, we're still profitable in that respect. So though that's a quick intro into SaaS. Hope that helps.
No, I think that's a very comprehensive kind of. It provides a very comprehensive analysis of the business model, and also touches upon exactly what's been some of the reason why recently it's made a lot of news, because it's been something that's become a darling for the investors. And actually, that it's a very good segue for me to bring up two SaaS businesses that have recently made news. So, सबसे पहले तो let's talk about Figma. So Figma, like, I remember, I'm sure you and I both probably noticed that when Figma's acquisition news, which is basically Figma got acquired for $20 billion by Adobe. And it's I think it's a 50-50 division, and it's a $10 billion cash transaction and a $10 billion stock transaction. And so it's a huge deal. I don't know where it ranks in terms of the value for how much money has been paid for an acquisition, but I'm sure it's definitely in the top 5. Anyways, so what a Figma एक ऐसी चीज है जो I know you use probably as product managers, as anyone that's working in a startup has most definitely come across Figma. So a lot has been said about what's the future of Figma, whether it made sense for Adobe to pay such a high price for it, given that it paid 100 multiples of Figma's. If I'm not wrong, Figma's predicted ARR by the end of this year is predicted to be around $200 million. And Adobe paid obviously $20 billion, which is 100 times that. So ये multiple है 100 times का, at least अब के recessionary environment में, जहाँ पे capital markets have been squeezed, where the cost of capital has increased a lot, does not make sense. But obviously, it's very hard to always just boil the acquisition down to a financial equation. And we're not going to talk too much about it because neither of us are financial experts, nor merger and acquisition experts. But I do want to talk about one thing. Let's talk about this. Why do you think Adobe acquired Figma? Which I think is going to unlock a lot of insights and it's going to help us drive the conversation forward.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense for Adobe to do that. Adobe for the longest while has tried to get into the collaboration cloud creative market as well. उन्होंने Creative Cloud भी अपना launch किया, and they wanted their cloud products to take off. And you need to understand that Figma का competitor है भी कौन. It's not Photoshop, which some people sort of misplace. It's actually Adobe XD. Adobe XD wasn't a bad product, but it has had traction and whatnot, and they ultimately also created a PLG model out of it as well. Like, it never took off as popularly as Figma because of Figma just had superior network effects and their growth loops were just amazing. And I think Adobe very quickly realized that future जो है, and this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, collaboration cloud में है. सारा का सारा उधर है. अगर आप ट्रेंड भी देखो कि सारे कहाँ जा रहे हैं, कैनवा हो गया, मीरो हो गया, असाना हो गया, मंडे हो गया, all of these are collaboration software that are built for remote teams. And now in this post-pandemic era, I think hybrid teams and remote teams are just going to become the norm. So therefore, everything is going to be remote first. And Adobe को ये realization थी कि उनके desktop products तो obviously the bread and butter हैं. Collaboration में they don't have that kind of a stronghold or that growth pattern that Figma was showing. So for them, it just made a lot of sense to acquire. Now, whether the price point was good or the right one or not, I'm not going to delve too much into it, but I can say that Figma की growth इस तरह थी कि it was posing an existential crisis to Adobe. And I think that's why they sort of buckled as well. At a point where they sort of said, कि यार, if we don't nip the bud right now, I think later on it'll become exponentially expensive for us. So I think that was one of the considerations that they were making, and it just made sense for them to do that. The other aspect to this is the fact that I think not many people know that Figma had no reason to sell. एक होता है ना कि Uber Careem के अंदर, I think Careem wanted to sell themselves because unit economics were still in the red. So Uber needed to acquire them, and there was a negotiation pattern over there. Figma was in no hurry. वो तो कह रहे थे कि जो Dylan Field है वो तो बैठा हुआ था टांग पे टांग रख के कि यार मैं तो chill कर रहा हूँ. Adobe wanted them because they needed to, and thus they had to sweeten the deal, right? ऐसे तो नहीं कोई आता कि अच्छा आपकी $10 billion के valuation है तो 10 ही देंगे. they want incentives and they wanted much more to basically put the foot in the door. The second part to that, I think what needs to be realized is that it's not. It's also a sort of an acqui-hire as well, right? So what that means is that it's not the acquisition of the software and then Adobe is just gonna somehow integrate Figma into it. Dylan Field and a couple of his, like a high level directors, jo bhi colleagues, and they're also moving into the Adobe umbrella. And Dylan will still remain the leader for driving Figma, and that was crucial because Adobe ko khud pata tha कि the main thing that we want is that talent or that think tank that was driving the growth over there. Uske bagair to Figma wouldn't have been what it is right now. So for that, they had to shell out, I think, a separate $2 billion and that too in I think apparently in stocks or whatnot to make Dylan come over. And as well as his mates. So that was also another bump into the price as well. So I can't comment whether Adobe overpaid. That I guess we'll see in time. But it definitely did make sense if Adobe wants to rule the creative cloud market for them to acquire Figma, and definitely at this time.
I think you touched upon the fact that it became an existential crisis for Adobe. Figma's growth became an existential crisis to Adobe. But अगर हम डायरेक्ट कंपटीशन की बात करें तो Figma Adobe का जो sketch, which is basically the direct product to product comparison for collaborative design work, अगर वो बात करें तो वो sketch है. Like was Figma bank? So just want to get this understanding properly. So are you saying that Figma Adobe thought about that sketch, or Figma or collaborative design work is going to be the future, or is going to become a very significant part of their business model? But Sketch did not allow them. Sketch was not able to tap into the same market that Figma was, in the same way that Figma was able to. तो उस वजह से उन्होंने acquire किया, या तो फिर, and the reason I'm asking is because obviously people who are Adobe users also know that Adobe के तो खैर there's a entire product suite that comes with it, right? आपकी जो photoshopping होती है वो एक different, मतलब उसके लिए एक Adobe XD होता है. तो उसके बाद आपके पास जो video editing के लिए एक अलग tool है उनका. Similarly, I don't know whether it's the same tool or not. Just a disclaimer, I don't use Adobe tools, and I probably will not use Adobe tools. So if I'm in any way messing the order up or the terminology, please do forgive me. But what I'm trying to say is that direct competition का Adobe as a whole Figma के साथ तो नहीं करा.
No, absolutely no. And I'm not sure if it's Sketch. It's Adobe XD. That's actually their prototyping tool, or more of the interface design tool. Sketch is apparently a separate entity, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, you're right. Absolutely. I think they can Adobe a problem. Figma clearly was just doing a better job in the growth dynamics, right? The Sketch के अंदर वो definitely था, but we can get into the growth part. के Figma was successful not to limit their product to just a designer pool of audience, right? अगर आप Sketch का देखते हैं, Adobe XD का देखते हैं, primary user है कौन? Primary user designer ही है. UX designers हो गए, graphics designers, etc. हो गए. But Figma is being used by everyone. आप भी यूज करते हैं, मैं भी करता हूँ. Product managers हैं, non-designers हैं, engineers भी आते हैं, उसके ऊपर collaborate करते हैं. Then you've got like traditional designers, UX designers who are working on it. So they managed to make it a much more general pool of personas, and that also like sort of spurred on their growth. Plus the community-led and the sales-led part. So they just had a much more massive growth engine compared to what Adobe had already put out there. And from a collaboration perspective, I think Figma just that collaborative interface and the user experience was just far more superior, and people sort of gravitated towards that, and that ultimately led to the idea that Adobe wanted Figma to be a part of their suite. Although I don't think they're going to completely integrate it or consume it. They'll still keep it as a separate entity, but they've sort of like nullified the competition.
Okay, Actually, you're absolutely right. I just confirmed it. Sketch is Adobe XDA. मैं Sketch के साथ confused कर रहा था. Sketch is actually another competitor to is actually
वो एक और ही है.
a tool very similar to Figma and Adobe XD. But it's not a part of Adobe's product suite. Okay, anyway, so that's interesting, and yeah, I agree, and that makes perfect sense. When it comes to Figma, there's one more thing that I'd like to discuss before we probably move on to some other topic. Is that a lot of the times and a lot of the articles that I've read, and we've had this conversation as well, Figma is the perfect personification for this terminology that throws around quite liberally now, which is product-led growth. And so what I'd like to understand is what is product-led growth? Can you help us demystify that? Because I think almost everything right these days is termed as product-led growth, even though it might be. And how was Figma able to just really consolidate on their earlier product-led growth, growth strategies, growth loops, to become this incredible company that it ended up becoming?
Right. So let's start with product-led growth. What is it? So essentially, it's a go-to-market strategy. It's a way you sort of introduce your product or give it into the hands of the user, where the product itself is responsible for acquisition, activation, retention. So the product is front and center of all those activities. The best way to understand it is in contrast to SLG, which is sales-led growth. Typical B2B software किस तरह बिकता है? या बिकता था ज़्यादा अभी भी मतलब कि we see a lot of these examples where you go to a marketing site for a product, you sort of understand what the features are, and you get interested. You sort of submit a demo request. A salesperson gets on a call with you, shows you in the entire software, and then if you sign a contract, they give you access to it, right? So that's the typical model. Product-led growth के अंदर you cut the middleman. So now उसमें ये है कि it's a self-serve model. You go, you understand what the product is, you sign up, and you go straight into the product and try to extract value out of it. Then there are different flavors to it, like freemium karte ho, free trial karte ho. Now, one thing that I will caution against is that don't think that product-led growth is just freemium and free trial. Some people कहते हैं कि यार अच्छा free trial ही तो है ना. That's basically what you're doing. Well, whereas that's not the case. Product-led growth एक पूरा एक mindset है where the entire company gets involved. So what that basically means is कि everything from pricing to the tiers that you have and how you sort of distribute the features across it, then the onboarding journey into the first aha moment, very quick time to value, all of that. Then the retention controls, the activation controls that you have, and then there's certain signals that you're sending to sales teams for understanding which accounts can be upgraded or cross-sold, and along with that, आपकी billing भी होती है. Then you're trying to expand those accounts as well, land and expand model से. So all of that goes into the product-led growth mindset, and even your sales and marketing team completely change how they operate because of that. So PLG is far more involved than just a freemium layer on that. So it's not a weekend project. मतलब कि काफी लोगों ने ये समझा कि बस हाँ, it's just 2-3 hackathons करेंगे और हो जाएगा. It requires a lot of iterations in that respect. To your second question, why Figma is sort of the great epitome of product-led growth, I'll try to keep this short. I know that we might want to expand into specifics later on. लेकिन देखे जाए तो Figma ने क्या किया? It offered a freemium model, which is a bit different from Adobe XD. I think they went with a free trial. तो उन्होंने freemium रखा, and they allowed for a certain number of designs to be, that users could make. But उन्होंने collaborators काफी open रखे. How many collaborators can come on a design and work on a particular file? So that basically had very inherent network effects. उसमें काफी लोग involved हो गए, and they were able to use the software. But their onboarding journey, their sign up, their pricing, given their free tier, the education के लिए उन्होंने completely free रखा था. That was very smooth. It was extremely thin when it came to getting access to the product and creating your first design and sharing it. It was literally that time to value was very short. So that was great. And then I think we'll talk about growth loops. Figma's growth loops were just mind blowing. Case study Harvard की बननी चाहिए इसके ऊपर कि किस तरह उन्होंने basically design किए थे. and how they sort of made it accessible not within the team, but also across teams, then across companies, and then it blew up. And then there was a sales-led motion on top of that they layered on before they layered on the community-led motion, which we can go into detail as well. वो काफी lengthy discussion है. But Figma was, all these components, as मैंने described किए, they sort of like perfected that through and through.
And I think you're absolutely correct. And I think you touched pretty much everything that in terms of growth loops. One thing that generally Figma ki success be, or if you look at some of my other favorite tools and some of the tools that have done very, very well over the past few years when it comes to SaaS, tools like Notion, Miro, is the essence of collaborative work. I'm sure, and it completely confounds me how some of the best companies and some of the best founders and some of the best products are so forward looking. I mean, when Notion started, or even when Figma started, or when Miro started, I mean, no one could have predicted कि अच्छा एक pandemic होगा जो आपका remote work or global, like आपका remote work, collaborative work on a global scale is going to be expedited so much so, right? The concept of an office will no longer be something that it's I don't think we understand it fully yet, but the idea that we have the way that we as an entire all over the world we've been able to essentially adopt to remote work. It's phenomenal, I think. But anyways,
and it's not only remote work, Abdul. Like I would say that even if you're co-located and you're working within the same physical location, at the end of the day, you're not always hopping into another desk and trying to collaborate on the same system. Even in those environments, that collaboration, being able to do it over the cloud, and not, हम पहले क्या कर रहे थे, Dropbox files share कर रहे थे, and then we're sending attachments on email. At least I'm a dinosaur in terms of that, so that's the era that I associate with. So even in those environments, it's just a no-brainer now for the likes of Miro, Notion, Figma, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and you're right? And so, the reason why I brought up the pandemic and remote work to care is just one of it's a phenomena that is just essentially has enabled or really furthered the usage of these tools that champion collaborative work. But मेरा कहने का, what I want to talk about is that why collaborative work has been so central to Figma's success, right? Because and a lot of it is deep rooted into thinking कि अगर मैं आपको बताऊं कि someone who is not in startups, who is not in technology, कि अगर मैं आपको बताऊं कि Figma क्या है, तो आपको मैं what is the way that I'm going to tell you, right? If I have to categorize it, I'm going to say it's a design tool, but it's so much more than that, because I think it's an equal amount is used by product managers. It's being used by product. It is used by product designers, but at the same time, and one thing that I think what you could not have probably foreseen a few years ago is the amount of insight and feedback that is also coming from people at the C-suite level, or right at the top of the hierarchy, in terms of the feedback that can be incorporated into the design work. And it's not, and I don't say this lightly, right? It has been enabled through Figma and through collaborative tools. Because what it has done is that it has brought everyone on the same table. And that kind of, like you said, that it's completely agnostic to the type of file you have. You can use an image, absolutely. You can use screenshot. आप कुछ भी करना चाहो कर सकते हो. You can very much run up, आप उस पे like I saw these templates that you can run stand-ups on Figma, right?
And so absolutely.
That kind of dynamicism, like for example, being so dynamic, has been one of the reasons why it's become so easy to adopt to this tool. Okay, I've gone on for too long, but I want to understand from your perspective, okay, this specific element of collaborative work, ये Figma ने किस तरह use किया, and why did they bank on it at such an early stage?
Yeah, I think Dylan Field was very bullish about this. That they announced their war over Adobe day one. Or TechCrunch के ऊपर ये भी article आया था. They said that design is meant to be collaborative, and Adobe just simply doesn't get it, right? And then they just basically went all in. I think with collaboration and what they basically saw was that the current state of affairs was broken. आज जैसे Adobe Photoshop की अगर आप बात करते हैं, the main export file of Adobe Photoshop in all its जो richness थी वो PSD file होती थी. और I've been there, and I don't know if you've been in that era के PSD files या EPS files आ रही हैं. I don't have the software installed in my laptop or my PC, and then I'm unable to view it or comment on it, right? So that was a big major hurdle. I'm not part of that conversation. It's a very design-centric artifact, which maybe, I might get involved by if they export into a JPG or a PNG. I think a lesser tool to solve that problem was InVision. InVision का एक बहुत बड़ा एक motion आई थी where they enabled at least that conversation to start happening, right? Where designers put their designs on InVision, they brought in people and collaborated with them, and then this allowed product managers, non-designers to also become a part of that conversation, at least collaborate over design. So collaboration, though, it was part and parcel in the DNA of every business. The only thing was that that process was horribly broken. And I think InVision पे गया, और Figma was sort of like that perfect evolution where they said that इसी tool के ऊपर आप design भी करें, which InVision didn't really provide at that time. कि इसी tool पे आप interface design भी करें, components वगैरह हैं, templates वगैरह हैं, which will allow you to quickly chalk up a great design. और इसी के ऊपर आप collaboration भी कर रहे हो. People can chime in real time, look at what the blocks are, and how to sort of solve that that design problem. I think it's also in recent years, अगर आपको 2010 और 2010 से पहले वाली बात है, design was never a major concern for a lot of these ventures. Or design always used to come second. ज़्यादा engineering का होता था कि how can we engineer a solution. But the design after, with the advent of Apple के इस पूरे era के अंदर, I think it just became so much important and evident to people that if we are to give access to lesser savvier users, you just have to simplify design. So design became such a central gravitational force that it couldn't have been done just by designers. It had to involve business analysts, to product managers, to CEOs, etc. So they knew that was going to be the centrifugal component, and that's where they bet on it. And I think Figma फिर essentially उन्होंने file वाला तो काम खत्म कर दिया, right? There's no file. You just log in and you're in, and you can collaborate. And that was the bet that they were playing at. And now we can see with all these other software that that's the motion, or that's the movement that we're headed towards.
Yeah. All right, perfect. I think we've talked about Figma a lot. One other SaaS company that's made a lot of nouns, but albeit in a more local context, has been Cloudways. So Cloudways is basically a Pakistani SaaS startup. It's not registered in Pakistan, as is common with almost all Pakistani startup and technology businesses, because Hamari policy is not favorable to companies being registered here, and it becomes very difficult to be able to attract private capital. That is a topic for another day. But anyway, so Cloudways is a Pakistani startup. Pakistani company was able to get acquired by DigitalOcean, which is a company that's listed. If I'm not wrong, it's listed on NASDAQ in US, and it got acquired for $350 million. That's the biggest acquisition in Pakistani history. And it's a SaaS business. And it's one of the reasons why I have been so absolutely psyched about this is that we finally have an exit, right? Over the past couple of years, we have celebrated our entrepreneurs, and rightly so, but we have judged them primarily on their capacity to be able to raise money, which is extremely important, because I think that's really, that's the match that starts the fire. But when it comes to signaling to investors out there that there is not just a gimmicky opportunity, it's actually something that is going to turn out. It's actually something that's going to turn out to be extremely beneficial for you. It's going to bring returns, is what I'm trying to say. And with this acquisition, we've finally been able to do that, or at least in a very successful way. मतलब as in, हमने पहले छोटी मोटी acquisitions देखी हैं. Daraz got acquired by Alibaba,
Yeah.
and similarly, I think it was some microfinance bank that got acquired by this Nordic firm. Telenor का था या वो साच रुक है, मुझे exactly याद नहीं है. But
I
इतने
think it was
बड़े scale
Taze. Yeah.
तेज तो अभी रिसेंटली हुआ ना. मैं तो पहले की बात कर रहा हूँ. But anyways, that's irrelevant. It didn't happen on such a big scale, and it definitely didn't happen within SaaS. So extremely excited about that. What is your take on this?
Yeah, definitely very exciting news. I think, again, very underrated given how much we were talking about fundraising last year. I think this sort of went by us without much noise, and I think it deserves a bit more recognition. For a Pakistan-based, primarily Pakistan talent company, I think they're based in Malta, but ultimately it's driven leadership and the talent and engineers and developers, designers, etc. They sit in Pakistan. Gary Tech is I think the parent company of that. So the acquisition, I think, obviously this again reaffirms the fact that we do have talent within the country to build globally admired applications and software as a SaaS. We are able to also provide that leadership to gain that traction and really compete on a global level. So that's another confirmation of that fact. The other thing it does is that, obviously, as you just mentioned, कि हमने fundraising तो बहुत ज़्यादा की है. Exits are the ones that really sort of solidify trust, especially from an investor point of view. So having an exit of that massive amount, $350 million, and mind you, like Cloudways is in a busy market. Like they sort of compete with the likes of DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean is who acquired them, but DreamHost ho gaya, Bluehost ho gaya, WP Engine ho gaya. So they're competing against big players. So to catch the attention of DigitalOcean, which is also a pretty big name in that cloud computing space, that is definitely an achievement. And it should also hopefully give a bit more of a reason, coming back to our initial point of going towards the SaaS route. SaaS की ये अच्छी बात है कि you can easily globalize that very quickly, and उन्होंने Cloudways ने with that infrastructure as a service offering जो उन्होंने की है, they were able to build up a global product and serve like so many customers outside, which ultimately fueled their growth. And up $52 million ARR, no joke, right? So I think, yes, this is definitely a case study that needs to be unpacked a bit more. I hope they come out and share a little bit of their learnings and democratize that across the founders within Pakistan. And I hope more people also look towards like SaaS models like these and try to go into that and pursue that further.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more than anything, it couldn't have come at a better time. We know that the funding has been somehow restricted. People are still being able to raise money. I think we're still on the mark to surpass what we raised last year, but obviously the same growth rate nahi hai. And generally the way that the market is around the world right now, we're in a very recessionary environment. Private capital has not been as easily available or as cheaply available as it was even like 6 months or a year ago. तो and खास तौर पे obvious, and then ये तो एक वर्ल्ड ग्लोबल स्केल पे तो इम्पैक्ट होता है, पर इसका सबसे ज़्यादा इम्पैक्ट comes to the risky markets, right? Risky markets like Pakistan have to face the worst of it, have to face the brunt of it, because obviously when in such environments the risk appetite for people decreases, and the risk appetite भी decrease होती है, and these investments in developing countries, and खास तौर पे us, which as we all know recently have been marred by economic challenges, climate change challenges, political challenges, so it becomes an even more risky environment. So it's a great news, and I think it couldn't have come at a better time, and it probably will serve as a reminder and will serve as an inspiration for many founders out there to keep your head down and just keep working, and somewhere along the line an opportunity will come knocking down the road. All right, I think we're coming to a close for our episode. So I'm going to, as part, so हमारे हर episode के basically जो last section होता है उसमें हम आतिर से उनके favorite content जो उन्होंने consume किया है throughout the week, we ask about that. And we also try to link it to a learning that can, be to a learning for product managers. So Atir, what has been that one piece of content you've consumed that you would recommend for our readers? And what do you think what lesson do you think, or what learning do you think it gives to, very basic product managers like myself?
Yeah. Yeah, I would recommend this podcast. I think it's also available on his Twitter by Lenny Richitsky ka podcast hai, which he's done with Shreyas Doshi on a framework called LNO, which is Leverage Neutral Overhead. Usme basically what Shreyas has described is a very interesting framework and a problem of and tries to pose a solution for time management for product managers. As you can see, calendars हमारे भरे होते हैं, and it's just very difficult to take out time to get anything done. And then even those double booking होती है, triple booking होती है एक ही slot के अंदर, which is a very very normal thing for me. And ultimately, what he sort of suggested was that we will get a lot of tasks in our queue, but not every task deserves the same amount of quality and attention that others do. And you might have to purposefully do a certain task at a lower fidelity than others. या उस पे थोड़ा सा फीका जॉब करना बेहतर होता है, या उसके ऊपर इतनी ज़्यादा मेहनत करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है जितना high leverage task का होता है. So an overhead task might be, I'm just giving an example, might be something like where you're filing in a ticket for a very nominal bug or nominal defect. So you don't have to like pretty it up or really spend hours in trying to get a very detailed synopsis for that. You can just basically create that ticket, give them enough details for the repro steps, and submit it. Similarly, कोई presentation है जो कि internally share करना है, don't spend too much time in prettying it up and then उसके ऊपर आप बहुत ज़्यादा focus कर रहे हो on the aesthetics. Just get the job done and do it. So that's one example. But high leverage tasks, जिसमें product strategy आती है, prioritization आती है, deep thinking आती है, where you're trying to do solution design या you're doing user research, उसके लिए time अलग से निकालना चाहिए, and then those are the things that you need to prioritize. So he's given a very tactical framework जिसमें ये बहुत depth में describe करता है. Check out Lenny Richitsky's podcast with him. Also check out his Twitter, Shreyas Doshi, where he does describe and unpack the LNO framework. So that's my recommendation.
Two of my absolute favorite influences when it comes to product management. All right. Thank you so much, Arthur. It was a pleasure.
Sir.
See you next week.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Assalamu alaikum.
Bye.
Allah Hafiz.